A beautiful good afternoon to you, wherever you're watching us from. This is Mr. Panuka. We're coming live to you from greenhouse number 10 today. And you may be wondering, why is Mr. Panuka shouting today? I think my voice is not always this loud when we do these videos. Apparently it's actually raining here heavily. So I've just taken refuge in greenhouse number 10, where we have an English cucumber crop, which we transplanted on the 6th of November 2020. Okay, so we've got about 1,100 plants. So this crop is just about a month old. And so you can already see how beautiful it looks, and we already have some fruits that have started, emerging, quite some few big ones. All right, folks. So in the video that we did a few days ago, I did promise that I'll come back with an installment on another topical issue. Should you leave full-time employment to do farming? Okay, that is quite a very topical one, and I'm sure you've seen a few other bloggers trying to cover this issue. So I just thought I also provide my 2 cents on the subject matter. Okay, and we actually do get quite a lot of questions. Is it possible to farm while you're still in full-time employment? And are you better off, I think, being in full-time, farming as opposed to full-time work and things like that? Okay, so this is a very tricky subject matter, and I would request that you treat, my submissions as just a mere contribution to the debate, and not necessarily being the gospel truth on this subject matter. Okay. Now, when you buy a new car, okay, you just buy a new car, naturally, you find all the systems are functioning, and that car, will move quite very fast, and it gives you that oomph, when you're on the road. I've never driven an Oteza, but what I hear from people that, have driven the Toyota Oteza is that, it gives you that edge to just overtake, other cars and the like. So having a new car that really, goes fast, it's good. It's got that thrill on the road. But of course, you've got to drive responsibly. Now, why am I using an analog of a new car? The origin of most of the people when they start farming, it's either they've seen something on social media, YouTube, Facebook, about this farmer who's doing very well, and naturally that propels them, that gives them that oomph to get into farming. Or you probably attended a seminar where there's this farmer who's spitting some very juicy numbers. I'm doing 200 boxes of tomato per day or something like that. Or you just read something on social media and things like that, and then that propels you, that gives you the energy, like, wow, let me also get into farming. Okay, now that energy is very, very good. It's good to energize. When you've come from a seminar, you've read something, it's actually very good to get energized. Just like that oomph for a new car, it's very good. But you've got to use that energy responsibly. Okay, just like a new car, it doesn't mean now when you find 5 cars, okay, just because it's a brand new car, you want to overtake all the 5 cars. So yes, you've come from a seminar, you heard someone talking about those 200 boxes of tomatoes, and you check, you punch the numbers, they are 20, 30, even 50 times more than your salary, and say, well, I'm wasting time. I need to get out of this full-time employment and get into farming. Okay? So just like the driving issue, we need to drive responsibly. Even that energy that you get from these seminars and whatever, you need to use it responsibly. You don't just get home and say, I want to quit full-time employment and get into farming. Now, allow me to repeat myself on some of the issues that I talked about, I think in the last video, about how expensive farming can be. If you're talking about what I called semi-commercial to full commercial, and we're not talking about, subsistence farming, there are a lot of things that you need to lay on the ground before you start that farming. And I think we've covered this, so I'm not going to repeat myself. Issues of land, the aspects of fencing, your irrigation systems, and of course even the market, big one. So those are critical issues that you actually need to take into account. There's staffing. So when you are energized, and you want to go into farming, and you're thinking about perhaps quitting employment, my piece of advice, like I have indicated in a number of my blogs and articles, is that try and use that energy to try and refine your planning process. Okay? Ensure that you sort out the critical basics of a farm. Issues of water, very, very critical. The fencing, like we said, farm dwellings. You need to sort out those basics before you think of getting out of employment. You see, full-time employment gives you a number of very good benefits, access to loans. Somehow, a payslip has got this magical aspect with the financial institutions. It's very difficult when you're just on your own. You walk into a bank, issues of collateral, creep in and things like that. But if you are in full-time employment, you are salaried, you've got a pay slip, usually somehow our colleagues in the banks, I'm a former banker by the way, get some comfort from a pay slip. So it's best that you use that pay slip now responsibly to finance some of this critical infrastructure that you need to run a farm. And only when you think you've actually sorted out the basics should you perhaps think of getting out of employment. But even then, there's this aspect called proof of concept. You needed to have actually gone through this proof of concept for whatever agricultural venture that you are doing. And you actually see that this can actually earn you money. You do not get out of employment to go and do trials. Similarly to the advice that I gave last time, that you're not going to use pension money to start doing, proof of concept, studies and things like that. That's very, very dangerous. Okay? So that's something that you need to take into account quite well. And so when you've sorted out all these basics, you've gone through the proof of concept, you see that this business model works, whatever farming, there's someone who's willing to buy for it and the numbers look good. It's at that point where I think it's actually the right time for you to think of leaving full-time employment. Now, one issue that I must actually indicate is that for our colleagues who are deemed too educated, got your masters and PhD, it's very, very difficult actually to make these decisions to leave full-time employment, because for you education is a huge investment, which it is, by the way, and you think of more or less like abandoning all these qualifications and then you just go and start farming. It's a big one. It's a huge one, to be honest. But let me say something. You've gone through the proof of concept, and this agricultural business, venture looks good. Someone is willing to buy the product that you're going to, farm, whether it's livestock, crop and things like that. Now, one issue that I've actually come to realize, if you are devoting, say, 10% of your time to a farm, somehow the returns will also be commensurate to the amount of effort that you're actually pushing in. Okay? So first thing, make sure that this business model goes through proof of concept. You are selling, someone is willing to buy your product. Okay? But then, you need to be aware that the level of effort that you put in somehow translates into the returns. And so much as I would say you shouldn't be too much in a hurry to kind of leave full-time employment, you need to know that at some point, I think you need to make that decision that your business needs a lot more time. Okay? Otherwise, if you push in 10%, you actually get 10% returns. Unless you've got a very magical, formula on how to turn around the business. So usually, I actually advise my fellow farmers that you, the proprietor of the farm, actually need to be the chief marketer. There are a number of farmers who, yes, the business has actually gone through this proof of concept, but then you're too quick to delegate even some of the critical functions of this business, especially the issue of marketing. The interface with the market should actually be your business as the owner of the business. There's no way, you don't even know who buys your tomatoes. You've never even been to there. You just send your guys and then they go and sell and things like that. Hey, huge recipe for disaster. Because what if this team walks away one day? That's where you're actually going to see that your business model then is not solid, given that it's too dependent on a few individuals. Okay? And of course, even you, beyond a certain point, you need to make sure that it actually outlives you. The marketing bit is enshrined in the entity and things like that. So very, very critical, issues that I think you need to take into account before you think about leaving full-time employment. But beyond a certain point, when you've actually seen that this business has gone through proof of concept and it's making a bit of money, at that point, it's actually a good idea that you devote a lot more time to this, entity. But like I said, you can weigh the options. Sometimes some of these full-time jobs, they actually give you quite a lot of money, but there are different options that you can deploy, where you can devote some time to your business entity and look at whether you can trade your expertise at a fee in what is classically called, consultancy and things like that, so that you kind of have the best of both worlds. Again, I'm not going to sound like a motivational speaker who will tell you, well, just leave full-time employment and get into farming 100%. It's not always rosy in farming. There are ups and downs, and for quite a number of years, the formative stage of the farm, it actually requires a bit of push, and so you need to have some kind of backup plan to finance some of the activities on the farm. So take that into account. Usually the returns that you get from the farm in its formative stage may not actually be sufficient to finance, especially the capital expenditure and expansion of the farm until a certain point. Okay, so very, very critical that you have this backup plan where you're going to get some money to keep pushing the farm up to a certain point. And of course, at a certain point, you need to make sure that it runs on its own. It can begin to finance its own, operational expenditure, which we call OPEX. And, in the long run, the CAPEX, which is the capital expenditure of the farm, whether you're doing a dam, you're, increasing the number of your greenhouses and things like that. But in the initial stage, make sure you've got a backup plan in terms of finance to push the farm. Okay, so I hope I've tried to contextualize, this issue of full-time, employment versus going full throttle on the farm. There's a time, okay, that you need to do something. Don't be too much in a hurry. Otherwise, just like the initial analog that I used on the car, you might actually want to start overtaking, 3 cars at a go, and then you land in a ditch because you did it too quickly. Okay, you left employment at a point when you needed that revenue to keep pushing the farm. So don't make those decisions based on emotions, because you came from this workshop where someone was talking about plenty money, and then you want to pack your bags, you start insulting your bosses, you actually have a lot of issues. Okay, I think as I conclude, talking about that speed issue that I talked about, that if you try to overtake 3 cars at a go with a new car, there are possible consequences to that. And we see it, especially for people that are loaded, pension, which I discussed last time. We've done it before, especially one of the biggest ones in Zambia is tomato, where you hear of so many boxes of tomatoes. You calculate the price, and I remember at some point ourselves, the price for one box was 300 to 400, kwacha one box. And I remember we went for about 2 hectares at a go. By the time that tomato was getting ready, the price had actually plummeted to around 10 kwacha per box, and at some point it even hit 5 kwacha. So it actually became cheaper to leave the tomato in the fields than to take it to the market. That's the point where even the guys at Soweto Market or wherever, you're actually calling and they're not picking their phones. Okay? That's the issue of overtaking 3 cars at a go. When the rules tell you that overtake 1 and then check whether it's clear. So again, that's one advice. Be a bit more gradual. Avoid what we call in finance overtrading. Okay? Where you grow too quickly, but then you're not in a position to actually support some of these other facets of the business. In the end, you actually end up, crashing. So be gradual, but again, don't be too complacent. So I think one other final point is, yes, you want to quit employment and go into full-time farming. I said, yes, take your time. Don't be too much in a hurry to leave full-time employment. But one other caution, again, on the flip side, is that we've seen some people that are too slow. They are in what I call perpetual research mode for so many years. Okay? This is a guy who will be asking you about the price of fencing a hectare for 3 years, and it's not happening. You are in perpetual research mode. Farming by its nature requires that you start something and then you begin to refine your art along the way. Okay? So yes, don't be too quick, but again, don't be too slow. Don't be too complacent. Begin to do something. Get on the ground. Okay? As they say, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. So you've got to eat and partake in this farming, and then you begin to refine your art. It's called action research. Okay? So that's something that you need to take into account. But otherwise, for these farms to begin to make sense, they need you on the ground. So that's something that I would be very, very honest with you. So don't be too complacent. Yeah, take it easy. But know that only when you actually devote a lot of time on the farm will you begin to see some very good fruits. And that's been my experience as well. This is 3 years of us running Panuka Farms, but I think when I began to devote a lot more time to the entity, this is when we're actually beginning to see a lot more, benefits, at the farm. Okay, but don't say Mr. Panuka said you need to leave employment so quickly. Okay, just take your time, but don't be too complacent. All right, folks. So this has been Mr. Panuka, and I hope those tidbits have helped to just join the conversation. So there's no right or wrong approach to this, but I think we just need to guide each other so that we avoid crashing. All right? So thank you so much, and have a lovely one. It continues to rain here. So just getting to the next greenhouse to try and look at what's happened. So from Mr. Panuka, it's a lovely, lovely afternoon, and have a lovely one wherever you're watching us from, and see you in the next video. And I must indicate, I think in the next video, I want us to try and just look at a comparison of a few investments: farming, real estate, maybe just those two. And we'll have an interesting conversation, because I know that is quite close to everyone's heart. So we'll try and do some assumptions and just have a chat. Again, Mr. Panuka does not claim to know it all. It's a conversation. So you're happy, just to join the conversation, and we too are happy to keep that conversation going, so that we help to make informed decision about agribusiness. So we love you. Have a lovely one. Bye bye.